Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So my name is Dan Mahalik. I am an assistant professor of product and industrial design here at Parsons, and I'm the director of the BFA product design program. And this is my friend here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chad Phillips. I run all of the retail for the Brooklyn Museum. I've been in the design world here in New York for 20 years now. And I also teach a class here at Parsons this semester for professional practice.
So we had this idea quite a while ago, but a lot of my own particular research and the teaching that I do here centers around the idea of localized production, local design, local manufacturing. And Chad and I have both been part of the kind of designer and maker scene in New York City for the past couple of decades anyway. And we wanted to sort of have a gathering where we could bring people together who could talk about the idea of a decade of design and change centered in one particular area of the city. But the decade doesn't necessarily only look back. It also looks forward at the next decade of design and change. So what we wanted to do tonight was gather together some people who are really instrumental in a lot of the design that's happening in Brooklyn right now, and have a view backwards, a decade or so, to this explosion of smaller scale, independent, self-supporting, almost micro-scale designer makers that have burgeoned in and around the borough, how they've been supported, and also how they're supporting kind of a design brand of what Brooklyn had become, and what the effects are in both directions in that way. And then we'd also like to turn the lens forward and sort of look critically at what does the next 10 years and longer actually hold. So we had some questions about where we're at now after 10 years of exciting developments in the borough, but also some critical questions that we might reflect upon as we move forward. So some of the questions that we thought we might ask is, who's really benefited from this attention that Brooklyn design has had? What effect has our work had on the daily life of over 2.2 million residents in the borough? Has it made life easier for most people? Has it made life more difficult, and in what ways? How long will this last? How long will this be seen as a hotbed of creativity and independent design? How can the brand of a geographic area, how can its brand equity be leveraged in the future for the greater good? And most importantly, how can we create a future of designing and manufacturing of products that's perhaps a little more inclusive, more active, more activist, more educational, more empowering to its own citizens, and more centered on kindness, sharing, ease and equity in daily life, and in some ways more critical and more exciting. So we really want to sort of be forward-looking about what comes next. So we have a series of short presentations by speakers who were really instrumental in the formation of where we are today and also where we may be going. And so we'll have a series of short presentations, and we'll follow up with a kind of guided, moderated panel discussion between them. Did you want to introduce our guests?
Yeah, so our first guest is Kyle Mead. Kyle is it's the way I know Dan, it's the way I know a lot of people. Kyle started the American Design Club here in New York and in Brooklyn in 2008. His career centers around the design community and the platforms he has shaped to highlight the creative output of other designers. When he first started, American Design Club was a bit of a creative community that was kind of selling, but they were doing shows and doing all these things. And they still continue to do that, but Kyle has moved the needle forward to also really help these people and brands doing DIY to actually become companies. And many of even Chen and Kai at some point, like a lot of the people who started early on with Kyle have now become parts of this. So Kyle's going to do a presentation and show us some stuff now. Yeah. So each presentation is going to, it's a short presentation we'll walk through.
And it's best if Chad and I just get out of the way at this point. So.
Yeah, exactly. There's a big green button.
So I guess hello. My name's Kyle. Thank you to Chad and Dan for putting this whole thing together. It's a really cool conversation. I think it's definitely worth a listen. My Brooklyn credentials are: I went to Pratt. I live in Brooklyn. I have a studio in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Just had my first baby in Brooklyn, so that's pretty high up. But I wanted to. Our company does events, basically. That's kind of how we started. But I wanted to kind of go just beyond that, like before that, to kind of talk to you guys about how kind of like it all kind of like came together for me, at least, and how I sort of seized the opportunity to kind of create something that still lives on, and we still, do events, and we still help designers. I feel like every season and every time we go out there to try and help them sell their product and stuff. So for me, this is my time at Pratt, the early years of when I was at Pratt, and kind of puts things in perspective because it is 2018, and like the company that I started did start in 2008, but there was a time before that when I actually like realized what was going on with Brooklyn, and it all happened 2003 about. This picture, I just chose one picture to represent my past, and I give it credit to New York Magazine right there. But this picture is a shot of the interior of the Future Perfect in probably 2007, I think. And all of these people in the room were designers that were living and working in Brooklyn and creating amazing product. And these are their names that are up on the screen. The two gentlemen in the back are Carlos Salgado and Bart Betancourt. And I actually interned for those two from like 2003 all the way to the end of school, which is 2006 or so. But all of the other people, they were part of this big community that was in Brooklyn on actually specifically like North 6th and Berry, which is where the epicenter of where the Future Perfect was. And actually, after I interned with Bart and Carlos, I actually went to work at the Future Perfect. I worked there, I don't know what years it was, but I worked there for like 4 or 5 years. And David Haldef, which is the owner of the Future Perfect, he's sitting on the couch in a light colored shirt right there. He introduced me to a larger community of designers, and they were all designers that he was selling and featuring in his stores. So when you look at these people that are in the room, yeah, that's just the people that are in the room, but these are all the people that I got to know very, very intimately. And I think that through selling their work and learning about them and having the designers walk into the store and like have a creative conversation about their product, and if I, the store clerk who has only had like a year experience, like could sell it, was like an exciting time for me. And another thing that this group of people did really well was they had really cool parties. So for me, like right when I graduated from college, I was all about throwing cool parties and showing cool designs. So that was like the be all end all. I think this one is Living Spaces, like the first Living Spaces show in like 2007. So with a group of my a group of my former, whatever you call them, classmates, thank you, Chad. Former classmates and a few other people that I had met through just doing some projects. In late 2008, we started the American Design Club. And this is actually the first logo that we created for it, which was sort of based on a dollar bill. So a eagle was their logo. On the United States logo, or the bird is the eagle. So we made ours the turkey, which is sort of like a nod to Benjamin Franklin, which is sort of a nod to, a community of people. And that's why we chose the turkey as our logo. So we had our very first show at Character, which was a store that doesn't exist anymore. And it was on Prince Street in New York. And it was back in the day. We all just invited our former classmates from 3 different schools, I think, RISD, Carnegie Mellon, and Pratt who got the invite, basically. And the show was sort of made up of like 20 pieces or so, but it was sort of the start of something. But the thing that happened from this show, and fortunately it's a long time ago, I don't have a photo of it, we blew the doors off the place with the amount of people that showed up. And that was something that's really interesting, I think, for now, because back then there was not as much communication platforms to spread the word on. And I feel like people were a little hungrier to go out to the show and actually see it, because there was no other real way that you were going to find out about the show unless it was either written about in the press, because websites weren't even as developed then. So there's something that happened back then that I don't think can happen now that started this motion, and it's a lack of communication then that kind of allowed us to do what we did in a sense. So some of these slides are kind of random and I don't actually remember the order of things, but doing that first show got us into the New York Now show, which then was called the New York International Gift Fair. So that was like, oh my God, we did this one show and all of a sudden we have this huge platform to sell product now. So this is a list of the people who was in that show, Outside of Sorts. This is the next show we did. It was called Hue Are You. It was at the Future Perfect in Brooklyn. It was just a study of color and design, which is kind of fun. This is the list of people, and you'll see that like the list of people, there are recurring names. If you kind of just, I'm not going to leave them on the screen for too long, but like if you glance at them, they're going to see familiar faces that were there or familiar names that were there, and then it'll go through and it'll start to change a little bit over time as some of these people either get real jobs or kind of change their philosophy of what they were doing in their careers, because we've been doing this for 10 years. So we have like a long list of people. This is a shot of the show on display at the basement of the Future Perfect. Purpose and Worth was the next show. 2009, this is sort of another thing that I kind of definitely owe our success to, was the fall of the economy and the opportunities that came to people who were a little bit more ready to do it for next to nothing. And that's the Purpose and Worth. The title of the show was based on that. It was the purpose and worth of every object, regardless of the price, is that we just wanted to make sure that art and design was still a consumable for people. And again, like we already started working with some really awesome people at Design Within Reach, just based on the network of these giant lists of people that we were creating to work with. Like one person knew another person who knew of another person who could get us a venue. And that was kind of the be all end all for the American Design Club as the years went on. It's like, where are we showing next? That's a shot of the show. Here's Breakable. This was at the Heller Gallery. This was a show all about glass. This was like actually one of our most nervous shows, I think, because I was never ready to commit a show to just one material. But because of Heller Gallery, if you're familiar with it, it's a glass gallery. They were like, well, you have to do it in glass. And at that time, it was the only venue available to us. So we did it. And probably at that, we were blown away with like what people could make in glass, and designers who maybe had never even worked in glass, what they were able to do. Here's that list. Here's a shot of the gallery. So this is the next show, Use Me. This is when we teamed up with Sight Unseen and showed at one of their venues. NoHo Design District was one of the first Sight Unseen offsite events that they did in 2011. And this was about this show. We were done. Thank God we did a show about a material, and now we can open it up a little bit more to a broader range of stuff. And this was about the functionality of an object. So all of these things had high function in the way that they were designed. That was that list, got huge. So we introduced judges to the show. That's what this show represents, is 3 judges that we had for the show. Here's Threat. I put that one in for you guys. This Chen and Kai in the middle, they just gave me a sock with oranges and we just put it in the show because it looks so good. Wasn't that like a Prada sock or something like that? Yeah. Okay, so this Threat was a show that we did that was based on that feeling you get when you hear a noise in your house and you think there might be an intruder in your house, when it's really just a cat knocking over a box of cereal. But the prompt for the show was, what would you grab if you were to defend yourself from an intruder at 3 a.m. or something like that? Even though the sock is great, the one that says the neighbors has everybody seen this doormat there? This doormat was spray painted. It was bought at Home Depot and spray painted stencil. And it created this Reed Wilson's career basically on this whole cheeky, funny like dialogue of words on product. And he created a whole line of doormats and other products to go along with it. And we as a company, I don't really talk about it that much in here except for that quick shot of the New York Now show, is that we've gone on to represent brands and helps bring their stuff to the market. And Reed was one of the very first ones that we had success with. Let's see what here. That's that list. That was a very, very good show. There was the party. again, like, it was all about the party for me, and until it wasn't. This show got us into contact with Fab.com, which doesn't really, they do exist, but within a reason now. But when they started, they were doing flash sites like crazy, and these shots are actually in Milan, and kind of showing like they gravitated towards us because they knew that we could access a group of designers, and they welcomed us to go show all the product in Milan. And I actually teamed up with the next presenter, Mark McGinnis, to do all these amazing graphics that you see, which Mark will talk to you, I'm sure, about soon. Raw and Unfiltered, back at the Heller Gallery. They loved us there. And we went on to do a show that was, again, a material-based show, but we opened it up, and thank God that Heller Gallery dropped their line about how it all needs to be glass, and they still wanted a material-based show, but we broadened it a little bit. And that's the list. This for all of these things, you just got to be on point, get press for as much things as you can so that you can kind of spread the word. And we've been pretty successful with our network of people, because when you work with that many designers, someone knows someone who knows someone at Metropolis and can get in. Fun and Functional, we went all the way to Los Angeles. This one was when we were actually starting to work with sponsorship, where a company actually gave us money to produce product that they were then going to look at to have, in a way, like first right to refusal to produce the product. I think nothing actually got produced in the end with this company. The company that, I didn't mention that, but they were called Knock Knock, and they're like a premier stationery company, but they ended up not going forward with anything here. But some of the best products came out of this show too, and it was in Los Angeles. There's that show. This was at the Standard Hotel. It's called Trophy Awards We Live With. This was about that object that you treasure in your home, and the shot of this is really cool because we made it look like a trophy store. And it was kind of up on a stage, and everything had a number, and then I don't have it in the shop, but there's a giant plaque of all the pieces that were in the show. This was a little bit more whimsical and a little bit more fun, but you know, it's a good show. Hometown Homage over at Story, which is a great little store on the west side. This was about where the designer comes from and them paying tribute to their hometown through objects. So all of these things were sort of representational of where these designers were from. That was the quick list right there. Curse the Darkness, back at Sight Unseen. Again, you can see that there's a community here, and we keep showing with the venues that we've made friends with, and then working with new designers based on those relationships. Curse the Darkness was a show we did for Roland Hill, which is a lighting company in Brooklyn. And Jason Miller said to me one day, who runs Roland Hill, and he said, "We want to do candlesticks. Can you do me a show all about candlesticks?" So we got that many designers to make candlesticks for this show. So that was kind of exciting. I think like 2 or 3 of them actually got produced. I think the James Ian Killinger, that one got produced actually. It's really beautiful. So that's the show. Installation of Frederick from Joya, who is spreading wax all over our candle or all over our giant table. And that right there is like 40, 50 designers on one table. It was a really fun show to sort of be at. Moving on, Growth. We're working now, this is a little bit future forward, and we're at the Design Pavilion. This show was all about plants. And we had a ton of designers for this one, and it was at Astor Place, and we literally had a giant greenhouse to sort of do that. This is last year, Rumors Fly. Actually was inspired by this one from David Byrne at ADO. He actually said this during his talk. He said, "Rumors fly." And what he was referring to was community, and how when you get together in a community, you talk and you chitter-chatter and you gossip or whatever, and rumors fly. And we saw that as a prompt for creativeness, and how the more you interact with people, the more ideas you get, and how those can go forward. ADO is here in the room too, obviously. Next is the show. That's Rumors Fly, and this is what we're doing this year. So this is Built, and you can submit an entry to Built at the website that we just created. And Mark is helping with the graphics on that one as well. So it's a giant community. It all stems from Brooklyn, and it's been fun doing this for the past 10 years, and I can't tell you how much communication has changed over the time from the beginning to now, and how just news spreads so much faster. It's almost harder to keep up and harder to like edge your way into it. But that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. So I was interested to see, a few of you know, but not everyone, Kyle and I did a cake show at one point. No, it wasn't an American Design Club show, but it was fun. We had a lot of designers make cake, and then we ate the cake at the end of the night. It was fun. So another thing, too, I just want to say on Kyle, on this whole community, is we all know each other, and a lot of these shows that he did, they're friends of friends. So it's an interesting way that everyone's gotten together, and how we're all friends of friends here. So on that note, Mark McGinnis, who's our next presenter over here. Mark's illustrations portray his fascination with the corporate workplace, culture, and politics. His background is in printmaking, and his hand-drawn and painted images use simple lines and allegorical themes. And he's done a lot of graphics for a lot of people in our community and done his own work as well. So, Mark.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of my work is based off of politics, society, and culture. That's sort of like how I use those to inform my decisions on the work that I'm doing. And today, of course, I'm going to talk about how I've incorporated queer ideas into my work. And I'm going to start out in 2006 when Bush and Cheney were in office. And they were kind of wreaking havoc on the world, much like Trump is doing right now. And there were a lot of wars a war on drugs, wars with other countries, wars on education. And so I created a series called the Alphabet series. And it's kind of covered kind of everything. Politics, drugs, sex, ethnicity, religion, but in a really like tongue-in-cheek way. And I shopped it around to stores of probably 2007, 2008, and I couldn't find anybody who was interested, because at the time it was still really it was just like so current, and people really didn't see the humor in it. So I mothballed the project. And so then a few years later, like in 2009, I moved to New York. This is sort of what I looked like. I was really fresh, and my intent was to really just come here and be an editorial illustrator. But then I started getting calls from people about those prints, because there was like a shift. Obama came into office. There was the stock market crashed. There was people were kind of scared, but they were kind of hopeful as well. And people started to see the humor in the series, and so I thought, oh yeah, maybe I should go and find a store in New York and see if somebody would be interested in. So I looked all over Manhattan and Brooklyn, and I found this store called The Future Perfect. And David, he loved the idea, and so I'll just kind of go over the work a little bit. So what I want to say about this series, though, it wasn't just about queer stuff. Like I said, it was just kind of all over the place. But selling it, obviously, there were some more popular prints than others. And there's probably maybe like 6 prints that sold really well. And one of them was homos. And so Then I met Kyle Mead, and who at the time worked at The Future Perfect, and he said, "Well, you can join the club, but you have to do a product." So, because Homos was so popular, which was such a big seller, I just decided to do a collection of Homo cards. So it's like a bunch of different ethnicities, and it was really fun, I thought, and I thought it could also sort of advertise my product. to and sort of get more attention in different cities and markets and stuff like that. Then after that, Kyle introduced me to Chad Phillips, who at the time was working at Fab, and he invited me to do something for the holiday. And because of the sort of success of those cards and the prints, I was like, maybe what I should do is, instead of doing something cliche with gift wrap, maybe I can like twist it and I can throw in some queer ideas, So I did this. I did 2 sets of holiday gift wrap, and the trick, of course, in retail is, you don't want to be explicit. You want to like keep it funny and keep it kind of clean. But what I wanted to do is kind of ride the line between 2 different groups. One was like with like queer men who liked like hairy men, and also like a heteronormative crowd who might see something different. So, for example, from like a heteronormative, people might see, oh yeah, that's, my husband or my wife might like that. But with queer men, they'll see another thing, just sort of based off of what their likes and dislikes are. And it's just more like, and what I was trying to do is like let people read between the lines and create their own ideas about it. So, for example, this is instead of wishing you a Merry Christmas, it was wishing you a very hairy Christmas. And then instead of chestnuts roasting on an open fire, it was chests, nuts, and fire. And the interesting thing about this is when I was doing this, I just had the men and the nuts and the fire, and it looked really kind of weird and kind of creepy. So at the last minute, I added the tigers, and that's really kind of like, it just made it. So when people saw it, they just started laughing. But before, people were like, yeah, I don't know, Mark. So that was the first set. And then the second set, the second set, again, it's another play on words. Instead of he knows when you're awake, he knows when you're sleeping, it's Santa, he just watches you. And what he's doing is he's looking, so it's kind of like turning Santa into like a creepy old man, watching his reindeer do bad things. So like strip teasing and snorting cocaine and pole dancing and all kinds of smoking pot, touching tails. And then the other one is instead of on Donner on Dancer, it's Donner on Dancer, Comet on Cupid. So it's just these little twists in the words and the wordplay. But the really like sneaky thing I did on here was all the deer had antlers, so they were all male. So it was super subtle, And a good example of like when I was selling this is I had a buyer who they were like, well, I just feel like the men are they're too gay, and it was a straight guy actually, but I'll take these. I'll take these other 2. I really like these. And I was like, sure, yeah, go ahead, take it. Well, I'll sell them to you. So the bias was was interesting. I didn't really have very many problems. People either liked it or they didn't like it. So, of course I sold it through Fab at first, and then I sold it through to other retailers later. And then the other thing that I wanted to say about this series was I really had no idea, like, when I was doing it through Fab, I was drop shipping it. So I got to see the labels of where it was going, and most of it was going to the Midwest and the South, and it was women that was buying it. And I always wondered. I just thought that I never really hit the queer community. But then I just found out like a year later that through like friends of friends that and just people that didn't know me, they came up and like, yeah, we really like your what you're doing, and we loved your paper, And it was really good to hear that like I hit the people years later that I want to hit. So, and then of course I afterwards I did a line of cards that was like separated to make it maybe a little bit more obvious. It was somewhat successful. And then I met Sheridan Coakley. I know this is not Brooklyn, but I met him through Kyle Mead and David from The Future Perfect, kind of at the same time. And Sheridan asked me to do a show in London, but I also showed it at The Future Perfect, and it was called Master Debaters. And I wanted to do something like a little bit more visual and with less wordplay, basically taking like a stereotype of a group of people and a stereotype of their conversation, and like with another person. It's kind of complicated, I guess, but basically they're the master like discussions that were going on in 2014, politics, religion, war, etc. Let's see. I did prints, but the most successful part of this I thought was the sticker board, where people could kind of like create their own conversations and dialogue. And there was a lot of queer, more explicit symbolism in there. I really liked this. It was more of a social experiment. It wasn't really retail, I suppose, but it created some really fun dialogue and responses. And then Sheridan asked me to do a China collection and I called it Megatronus. This is an interesting story in particular because what I wanted to do is reference the Ramble in Central Park with this plate. And I don't know if you guys know the Ramble, but in the 70s it used to be a big gay cruising spot. And I just sort of wanted to pay homage to it. And so initially I just had all men in here lounging, but it was super subtle and you wouldn't know it just probably in the name. And again, it's kind of like I was trying to ride that line between people, like if they didn't know the story, they would like it, you know? But if they did, then it would just maybe have some symbolic meaning. So, but Sheridan wanted me to keep it like a little bit more universal, I guess. So I added some people and then I just called it Sheep's Meadow. But it's kind of that was the story of the plate. But then I added, again, it wasn't explicit, but I did add, some characters in here into these cups and these runners and bikers. But again, it's not like saying, hey, here's a gay cup and here's a gay, gay runners and gay bikers. It was just much more subtle, like that. So, but then I separated them out too, and I did these posters, and prints that I sold in like Manhattan and Brooklyn to some retailers that liked it. But I did them in different languages. Like this is Japanese, basically a hairy man riding a bike, and a hairy man running. And then the following year, I did some trays for Sheridan, and I did this hairy man riding a bike again. Anyway. And then my last project I want to talk about is Mark of Brooklyn, which is kind of a brand, like a new brand, a different brand under my name, I guess. And the whole idea was what I started out with were some pinups, because you see a ton of pinups of women, but you never really see pinups of men. I thought it might be a good idea, and I thought I could again ride that line, but. The pinups, I felt like maybe probably would do better just in publishing if I went through a publishing company. So I switched to towels, and the towels really kind of took off. And the great thing about the towels is like the use of I had both like the heteronormative crowd, the straight people bought it and used it in the kitchen. But the guys bought it and they used it in the bedroom. So if you can kind of read between the lines on that. But here are some of the characters I did. This is, I sort of based them off my friends. This is Kevin, Christopher, and Jason. They were all straight. Well, most of them. And then I started working with installation installations and like finding like fun ways to display them. So this was sort of an installation and but also in a retail space, so you could kind of have a more of an experience around it. And then I did another show in sort of retail experience in Brooklyn and at this store, and they gave me like a whole wall. So I just did a huge mural, and again, it was kind of a subtle reference to the Ramble. And then I included more sort of queer, hairy men that obviously that would appeal to that group. But I also did animals and flora prints and mix it up, because I was just trying to understand, like, it was going to be a mix of people at the space. And the interesting thing is that I sold out, but again, with the different types of people, because I was there and I had a limited amount of product, I knew who was buying. So anyway, that's sort of how that went down. And then here's just some pictures of the towels and how I kind of displayed them. It's an animal. Oh, and then I started actually creating some new associations. But anyway, thanks for listening to me, and thanks Chad and Dan for inviting me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So Janine Hayes and Brian Mason are from Afro Chic. They're a husband and wife team behind the Brooklyn-based interior design brand of the same name, Afro Chic. Their interior design practice focuses on the seamless integration of modern design and cultural style in today's homes. So, thank you.
I want to make sure. That's fine. Hi, everybody. Do you have your sound on?
I just want to make sure this is on. Okay, we're good.
I'm much
We're good.
louder. So, and what do I press here? Just the green button? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to talk about design and activism because it's pretty much what we do at Afro Chic. And we started actually the presentation with a quote from Bri that he said yesterday brilliantly in the kitchen, and it was like, hey, this is kind of what we do. And our brand really starts from an activist standpoint. So we thought it'd be good to define what Afro Chic is. Bri's an academic. I used to be a lawyer. And so I think for us, definitions are really important. And we do come from design from a sort of academic standpoint. So Afro Chic is a theoretical construct that takes on the humanizing project of designing, displaying, and celebrating African-American homes. Our products are a range of things. We have a book. We have products in terms of home decor products. We also do content creation, and we design spaces. And really, in the sort of to bring it down to what we always say, our real product is to say that Black homes matter, and to do that in a number of ways through this lens of design.
So a lot of what we do with Afro Chic really started with this book. So originally, as Janine said, we're not originally designers by training. I'm an academic. Janine was a lawyer. We started in San Francisco, where she was working with a anti-domestic violence organization, and I was just kind of wandering around picking up random master's degrees wherever I found them lying on the ground. Until we had this opportunity to start to write a book. So we had a chance where Random House kind of contacted us and said, we've been following your blog for a while. We want to know if you're interested in doing something like this. So that became Remix. And so it gave us an opportunity to kind of take what we have been doing, the things we've been covering as a blog, and turn them into a real design philosophy. So we started thinking about what Afro Chic actually means and that became Remix. The idea was always to stand at sort of the intersection of modern design and culture, to take away the choice that people have to make between a place that looks modern and something that's cultural but can seem a little bit dated, and really make the argument that the two are and will always be better when they work together. So what we did was actually create a system. So the first half of the book basically goes into what we felt to be the elements, the foundational elements of interior design. So things like color, pattern, art, furnishings, and look at how each one of them can be used to carry an emotional or a cultural weight. So that way, as the system goes on, no matter what modern design becomes, whatever it becomes in the next 5 years or 50 years, these will still be the ideas that you'll use to blend culture seamlessly into any space.
And I will say that for us, when we started our company, which was actually in 2007, Brooklyn was a really big part of it. We weren't living in Brooklyn. My sister actually lived in Brooklyn. And we would come in from San Francisco and visit. And it just became this space where we felt like we could be a little bit more free and express ourselves in a way that was much different than what we were experiencing on the West Coast. And I think it was really important for us as Black designers because we felt like there was already a community in Brooklyn that we were just immediately tapped into when we would land at JFK, that we were just like, wow, there are people here that are creating and doing. So when we were writing Remix, Brooklyn was actually the first place that we went to scout homes and spaces and wanted to make sure that we had a really diverse interior design book.
And it was interesting because we were kind of led there too, because even though we were starting in San Francisco, people tended to think that we were in Brooklyn. So we were already a part of that community, which was kind of it was bittersweet because we got invited to a lot of really great parties that we couldn't go to because we were on the wrong coast.
Another project that we started doing was something that actually just launched last year called Sneak Peek. And we've been writing about design for a long time and also doing some production in terms of video production. So Sneak Peek was a project that we did with HGTV. It was a Facebook Live series, and it was an opportunity for us to feature diverse homes from all around the country. And I'm sure a lot of folks watch HGTV. And when we would hear about people watching it, they would say, I don't see people of color when I'm watching HGTV. Everybody looks the same and they're all in the South. And so we said, well, let's change that. We have this opportunity. Why don't we look at more homes in New York and also look at integrating more people of color into these home conversations? And so
one of the things that kind of typified Sneak Peek was that it was, and the whole title was Sneak Peek with Afro Chic. So if you ever go looking for it, it's still on the House Hunters page. But what was interesting about it was the positive approach that it took to design. So it wasn't a emergency makeover show. It wasn't an intervention show. We weren't going in and fixing anything in anyone's home. The idea was to really look at people who had creative backgrounds, who had really great style in a way that they told their stories in their spaces, which has always been sort of a cornerstone of what we do. And so it instead of it becoming something of us sort of imposing our style on something over and over again, it became a way of looking into these spaces. So we got a lot of comments in terms of people would say, I didn't know that Black people had homes like this, or I didn't know that there were this many Asian people in New York who had these great homes of this style, or things like that. So it became a way of really presenting new images of different communities to this large online audience.
And believe it or not, those are some of the odd comments we would get. People did not know those things. And so in 21 episodes last year, we reached over 4 million people and really helped to, I think one of the things that we were most proud about was bringing different people who looked different into these sort of HGTV viewers' homes. And so we had, couples who were straight, couples who were gay, families that were Black, families that were white. And it was really a unique way for people to see that, hey, we actually brought New York to HGTV, and that was definitely an exciting part of our journey. Our spaces also celebrate culture and heritage. And, Brian and I always come from our own lens of being African American. When we wrote Remix, we had to think about what was different from the homes that we grew up in, or our grandparents' homes that were different from the homes of some of our friends. But our spaces are universal as well. It really is about how do you bring culture and tell that narrative, tell that story of who you are. And so in our spaces, we do just that. This is one that we did in Culver City. It was at the Helms Bakery Design District. And it was the first African-American show house on the West Coast. So we had a giant 3,000 square foot raw warehouse, and we worked with the Helms Bakery District and they said, basically, you can do whatever you want. And I think anytime you're a designer, that's really scary because you kind of think I can do whatever I want. And my nightmare is that I'll just have like a chair and there's like a light on the chair and everyone sees that I have no idea what I'm doing. But it turned out to be a pretty good space. So one of the things that we did with this space is that it's definitely very modern. We worked with a lot of modern design stores, but then we brought in those cultural aspects. So the wallpaper that is there is a piece that we designed with a designer, a friend of ours in Brooklyn named Samantha Hahn, that's called Sisters, that has these women in these beautiful headscarves. And so it just becomes a little play on chinoiserie or toile, but it's also a very culturally minded piece. The pillows that we developed for this room were also handmade and dyed in Rwanda. And they did this beautiful batik dyeing, but then it integrates beautifully, in terms of a modern context as well.
So this becomes an interesting place where you have sort of a business interest and the cultural interest, and there's ways to tie the two together. So, for example, what Helms Bakery was trying to do there was they had an empty space, and they wanted to show all of their customers, people in the area, what they could do just shopping at that district. So they had about 10 different retail stores there, Room and Board, HD Buttercup, Rejuvenation, and so on. And so they basically gave us carte blanche to go shopping, basically at all of their different stores and create this space. The idea that we brought to it, though, was to create, a modern and very specifically LA space. So, for example, we don't have an image over here, but the kitchen space is entirely outdoor because LA is one of the few places in the country where if you want to barbecue every night, you can. And if it ever rains, you order a pizza. But the idea here, what we see with the art, was very specific. And so in our minds, the two people that you see here are actually the two people who own the home. And so that was something that was reflected both in, things like the wallpaper and this idea of sisters, because those two women could actually be two women from anywhere in the diaspora. That head wrap is universal or nearly so. So this idea of being able to see and have that recognition across cultures and across countries is something is very endemic to our style and to the things that we try to do. And we actually had the opportunity to build a really amazing library space here. And we had about 100 books all on, hip hop culture or, pictorial histories of the Black Power movement. And so this idea of, a subtle cultural vein went through the entire thing. And so it became a big part of all the events that we held there. Now, this house is a home that we're actually just recently finishing up in Philadelphia. And again, it touches on an important cultural point. It's a family home, so an African-American family home that's been in that family for about 60 years. And in fact, it's my family. So that gives it a little bit more of a personal touch. So my great-grandmother purchased this house in the early 50s, and now the fifth generation of my family is currently living there now. So it gave us an opportunity to kind of come in and really rejuvenate, but then also tell the story of an African-American home that's been in the same family, that's passed from hand to hand, and that has been a place where everyone in the family has come, lived, stayed, and grown up for a long time.
Yeah, to this project, with every project that we do, there always feels to be that sense of the activism comes in what we're expressing and what we're doing. And this is a quickly gentrifying neighborhood in Philadelphia. So you see that when his family moved there, it was a mostly Jewish area, and they were the second Black family to move in. Now it's gentrifying, and you're seeing more younger white people who are moving into the area. And a lot of the folks who have been there for a long time now can't afford their homes. And so we all can relate to that because that's what's happening in New York all the time, and what's happening in Brooklyn. But it became important for us to be able to restore the home and tell that family story within the design. So we brought in a lot of classic furnishings, felt like classic American furnishings that his grandmother would have had or great grandmother would have had 60 years ago, and then updating that with also modern art and this modern aesthetic. And that fits into a lot of our projects when we're doing it, whether it's product design or interior design. It's always about how do we tell the story of the people that live there, and how do we make it so that it's accessible. So our products illustrate, again, the beneficial relationship between culture and design. I will say that our product line actually started really selfishly. I always loved design. Like Bryce said, I was a lawyer, but I would come home at night and I would just be like online, just looking for new things to buy for our apartment. And one of the things I really wanted to buy was a pillow of a woman with an Afro on it. And I thought, I'll just, go online and Google that and I'll find it. And I couldn't find it. And then I got frustrated and I was like, this has to be out here. Like, why don't they have like just a silhouette with a woman with an afro? And so I thought, I'm just going to make it. I'll just make this pillow. And so I found a digital printer in San Francisco. I found a place to make that did the inserts. And that's how we made our very first products. Since that time, our product line has expanded into lots more pillows, because we love pillows, poofs, fabric by the yard, and other small furnishings for the home. But all of the products themselves have this idea of culture and modernizing it in some way. So again, at the top, you'll see the blue and white pillow, which is the sisters, the women with the head wraps. The bottom poof, that's the white one, is one that Brian designed that's called Jumping the Broom, which is the tradition of during times of slavery, African Americans couldn't get married. And so one way to signify that you had a committed relationship was that you could jump the broom. We jumped the broom at our wedding, and it was really great to be able to develop a piece that celebrated that tradition. And then finally, last year, we launched a line that we're really proud of. It's all inspired by Brooklyn. It's called Brooklyn in Color. We became the first African Americans to ever have a paint line, which was something that was really interesting to Google and find that hadn't happened before. And we developed 20 shades that are inspired by home for us, but that focus on an African American heritage. So our paint line has colors like Basquiat blue. We have Black Star, which of course is, an homage to Mos Def and Talib Kweli. And we also have colors like Hunterfly, and Hunterfly is representative of where we live. We live in Crown Heights, and Weeksville was one of the first free African-American communities in Brooklyn, right? It was the first one?
One of the first.
One of the first. Mm-hmm. And they had these beautiful historic homes called the Hunterfly row houses. They were painted in this very light blue. And so we were able to take that idea of that color and actually bring it in to our line of paint. So I think, again, it just goes back to that point that everything that you do as a designer can have an activist standpoint. It can mean something, and it can mean something that is critical to who you are, to your culture. I think that we also saw with the graphic design, it meant something when you're talking about the queer movement as well. And I think that, when you're looking at product design from that standpoint, it kind of fulfills you in a much different way, because now you're not only creating something, but there's a message behind what you're creating. Right. Yep, go ahead.
So in the end, what all of this essentially means is that as everything is changing, the world is changing, and we all see that there's a need for more voices, there's a need for more action and more inclusion, which is what actually our Design Against Hate initiative is about. It's the concept of American inclusivism, the idea that the rights of any group in this country are only as safe as the same right for every other group. You see that you have this need for more action and more activism. And a lot of times as designers, we may not think that there's a way to tie what we do professionally specifically to these roles, because the design is superficial, right? It's pretty rooms and pretty furniture, and it's nothing deeper than that. And we would disagree. I think, as we can say, as we tried to show, it's easy to say that culture or activism or social justice is a part of the DNA of what you do. It's the sort of throwaway corporate slogan that we hear a lot from a lot of different people. But for us, the way that you do it is to take every little thing that you do and tie it to something bigger. And then when you do that, you start to see the connections, and you start to see the bigger picture, and you start to find opportunities to speak. You start to find platforms that you can give to other people so that they have an opportunity to say what they have to say as well. And then when you can do that, that's when you start to see what design in Brooklyn has become and what it can become in the next few years. So more than just pretty rooms, more than furniture, design is culture. It's driven by culture, and it drives culture in turn. And so as we go forward, the more that we're able to see that connection, the more that we're able to take charge of that relationship and use it to create the world that we're all looking for, the more that we can actually turn design to what I think it truly can do.
Yeah. That's our presentation. So yeah, reach out to us, learn more about us at afrochic.com. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to make sure who's coming next before I start an introduction. Okay. So now here we go for some. Can you guys hear me? For some crazy stuff from Chen and Kai.
Hi again.
Kai.
I'm Chen.
I'm Kai.
So we actually went to school with Kyle. Kai was in Kyle's year, and I was a year behind.
And the way we've sort of organized the slides that we have here are just generally in a chronological order, but if it hasn't been sort of explicitly said, like what we wanted to talk about is how we're, over the last 10 years, have developed, as a practice, but then also how, the design scene has in New York. And in 2006, or maybe 5 even, Kyle had organized like a student show at the Future Perfect, which we were both part of. But, we were still selling with the Future Perfect, but it's both of us have sort of also evolved into something else.
Yeah, and the way the slides are kind of organized, are it kind of the things that we were producing is kind of based on like what's accessible in terms of not only materials that we have to make things, but also where those things can go to be sold. This is like so a little bit background. After I graduated, I worked for this design store, Moss, which was, like the design like temple in New York. And I kind of walked in right at the end of 2007, right before everything went off a cliff. So I worked there for a little while before kind of starting to produce our own work. And Kai and I, our business is just called Chen and Kai Williams because we just had studios nearby. We never really intended to start a business together. And it just became too complicated to explain to people that, we both have separate bodies of work, and then we worked on stuff together. And so we just kind of threw all our projects together into under one name. And so this is actually predates us working together. This is a vase that I made. It's spandex netting wrapped around a glass vessel, and then it's sprayed with expanding foam. And then the foam, which is normally yellow, it's not UV stable, so it would crumble from sun exposure. So then it's sprayed with like a rubberized paint.
But in a sense, it's also like how it represents like a incredibly cheap object that material-wise, but it can be this really complex form. So.
Right. And so when we first started making these, Moss was still open. So there was still like a venue to show like work like this where it was, kind of formally almost a little gross. And it was like a very like niche slice in time where these were selling as fast as I could make them.
But I don't know that we would have been in Moss if there wasn't that start of that decline going on as well.
Yeah.
So, again, I think the decline really helped the design.
I mean, and at the time, the reason we decided to kind of start our own thing was there were really only like 3 or 4 design studios you could possibly even go work for. This was a short-lived store that Phillips DePury had. Brent, who's pictured here, he's now the manufacturer of Memorial, the Max Lamb Terrazzo, but he was head of the Phillips design retail department, and he he actually worked with me at Moss, and he went on to start this shop, which was only around for like a year on Park Ave, and these bookends that we produced, the reason they were these kind of just like chunks of stone with like a pound of cement poured in was because he realized he had all these books and nothing to hold them up, and it was a week before the store opened. So it was just like this, like what can I possibly make in a week? And then these coasters were kind of a mixed material experimentation where we were taking spandex netting and soaking it in urethane resin and then wrapping things around it and then cutting it like a ham hock. And the spandex from this actually came from, these vases, because we just had, it's like whatever material we had lying around. Like this is literally $5 worth of materials, and it's like, how do you take $5 and put it next to like a Gaetano Pesce, like make it look like it's worth the sum being more than the parts. And then, just more shots of the...
In a way, I hope that as we progress through these, you see that, the practice itself is evolving and the finishes are getting better.
Yeah.
But
this is like the mold that was used to make the bookend. It's like super simple.
which will appear later. So this is how we launched our website. We really wanted something that could appeal to maybe more of the internet than the design community. So we did this project where we launched a new knife, new shank every day for a month, and it actually generated a lot more press than we thought it would be.
Yeah, I mean, we were asked to be like the New York Post wanted like a little blurb, and I think we played it too safe, so never ran. But
we still get these weird links from like Czech knife forums that I love following that back.
But these are all made also from just like stuff we had lying around the studio. This is actually a Vitzu paint chip. And this is a piece of like a Vitzu shelving track. But at first we really were just making things with whatever we had lying around. Like it didn't really matter. And then as we progressed, we started figuring out ways to like very cheaply use like regular manufacturing methods. So
formerly we were based in Greenpoint, and it's still a large stone polishing area, especially for countertops and things at this scale. This is a bracelet. Really, were out of their wheelhouse, but they were pricing things by the foot of polishing. So we usually worked with a stone polishing place once and only once, because they would polish it one time based on those countertop prices.
Yeah, and so we were like trying to figure out like stone is this like everybody knows stone is expensive, but if you were to take a slab that costs maybe like $40 a foot, but you can turn that $40 worth of material into maybe like 10 or 12 objects, like then we can access this manufacturing at a very low cost. And then it wasn't until at first actually we brought the vase. We showed the vase with American Design Club at New York Now, and we were like, well, I was used to like the Moss stores, like stores that would sell stuff like this, and like that's like a super niche type of store. There's maybe one store in every country that sells something like this. So it was, kind of bursting a bubble where like, how come nobody wants to write any orders,
It was an inappropriate place to show that thing, but in a way, it also helped us like realize that we couldn't just target that one segment, which is crazy.
And so we realized we had to also produce things that were more commercially accessible, and that's when we started making these planters. And these planters were also, something that we could produce in-house at scale. All it requires is a little bit of silicone, and we just cut the fruit in half and then poured silicone on it. That was it.
So, I mean, this we've stopped producing these at this point, but for over the last 6 years of this product's lifespan, we've produced maybe 10,000 of them in-house.
Yeah, just on like a table, maybe double the size of this podium.
And I can go into like why they weren't knocked off for a long time, but it's sort of an interesting in that it doesn't scale properly. It doesn't. There's no benefits in scaling, and so we were able to keep it at this fairly low volume compared to a lot of major manufacturers.
Right, and this was like the first mold. It was literally just half a cantaloupe.
That's the roof of Chen's old Explorer.
And so we also were like, with this product, we kind of explored like the idea of like making like a minimum viable product, right? So like the original ones, it takes a lot of effort to carve out like the internal part of the mold. So you could see on the cantaloupe, that's just like a takeout container, and then there would be logos or like a Solo Cup logo on the bottom. And when we drilled the drainage hole, we would just make sure to blast out, push extra hard, and there'd be a crater there.
I mean, yeah, it's just most, we went through about 5 different rounds of molds of this, each one getting slightly better, slightly more time consuming, but, slightly better finish on it.
And then this is eventually become these porcelain bowls that Areaware produces. So, now these are manufactured in a factory in China. It's this very high quality porcelain. And so, it's like you could go from this very rudimentary way of exploring an idea and then eventually find its way into an industrial production level.
And they all those stops have, places in the market too.
We also produce these mirrors for Areaware. This is also like a very early idea. We were the line weight. The reason all those features are that kind of width is because we had a CNC machine, and that kind of determined the scale of what
the
these
white
pieces
panel
were.
behind it is, if anyone knows CNC machines, it's a spoil board, which is what you cut into when you're cutting through a material. It's been painted white, and we just really enjoyed those designs.
This is like an early water jet test where like the mirror was pretty low quality.
Well, it was an IKEA mirror, which is they're made in a very different way than a lot of other mirrors. So it's always interesting to try to take on these other factories of scale.
And then along with producing those planters, we were like, okay, we have this cement casting setup going. What else can we make? And so we started making these cast cement boxes. And then we had all this waste material because whenever you're casting, you have a little bit of leftover. You don't want to run out of cement when you're filling a mold. So instead of throwing that away, we would just drip that onto an object or make a big pile of it. And it would create these kind of stalagmites and stalactites. And it was a way of creating ornamentation without really having to, like painstakingly do anything. It was just like this byproduct of another thing. And the really interesting thing is, we had this piece in a show at the Museum of Art and Design, which is like the junk from the stuff that's in the gift shop, So it was like this funny inverted kind of value
pyramid. I mean, so similarly, the producing like the coasters, which are the resin ham hock coasters from earlier, was a lot of scrap that we were also keeping, and it's just really painful for us to toss anything when we see some kind of beauty in it. And so this is a starting to recast those scraps back into other resin pieces to make a different surface. And and for years we really explored what kind of patterns could be made from that recycling.
Yeah, and then here we're like, we were trying to always make things in a way that nobody else could make, which created kind of scalability issues. So like things like this, we still continue to make in the studio because there's no way you can find a factory to do this for you, right? So these are all different types of materials cast into a block and then planed down so you could see the cross section. Kind of a bigger version of those coasters. And then we made like really large objects. This is an 8-foot tall lamp. There's one that's another 1/3 taller.
12
that's
feet.
12 feet tall. But then also the little pieces that are left over, we actually make more money selling scraps from our objects than the objects themselves. Like this is just little chunks of material left over from producing those large objects, which are just dipped and you put like a key ring on it.
We actually produce a lot of stuff for the Whitney store, which is they FedEx us their trash, and we chop it up and send it back to them.
And then so like this idea, which we had very early on, eventually it gets manufactured at a factory. It gets simplified and industrialized. Same with this is of a marble vessel that we make in-house, and then this is a licensed version that Good Thing manufactures. And it the material change makes sense because with this one you can kind of just it flat packs and you self-assemble it.
But we're producing both of these objects at the same time, one in-house, one with a manufacturing partner. So they sort of both have this place in the market at different levels.
Right. And then so like this is like, retails for like $1,500 and this thing for like $200, so you're like, you can exist in all these different levels, hit different points in the market, use different types of materials. And then eventually we started also to manufacture a lot of products overseas because, for example, this thing is cast iron, and I don't think we could find somebody to do that here.
No one would touch our orders. But I mean, what's interesting, this one, we tried to reference this sort of traditional Chinese form of a ding, which is a traditional three-legged pot.
Yeah, and so like we slowly, as our studio got older, we figured out what products it made sense for us to self-manufacture and what things it made sense. For example, this is a machined hook. You can kind of have that made in a lot of places, and we don't actually have the ability to do it ourselves. So these are all like our current product line, which is like the smaller products that we wholesale to retailers. It's for the most part manufactured overseas.
One of the things we're also just trying to do in these last products is build a formal language to mesh with the studio, which is a very material-based studio. So
yeah, and so like, but then like, of course, we still like the reason we started actually producing these small things was so that we could support our passion, which is like making these kind of weirder objects. And so these are like the new products that we've been working on the last couple of last year or so.
This is a table where we've split river stones and then held each of them in a metal armature. It's back at the Future Perfect, who are obviously selling different things. No.
And then this is like we kind of wanted to make like a clear terrazzo. So instead of seeing the stone as just like a flat graphic, you would see the full three-dimensional object. And so the stones are UV bonded to glass, so they kind of just float in space. And again, this is like something, even though like this glass cube is made at a fabricator in Brooklyn, they're not going to touch this project. They won't like actually put the stones on for us. They'll just give us the raw glass box because, again, nobody wants to do like these like weird mixed material things. So that's kind of like what makes sense for us to do ourselves. Whereas like, a simple machined object, really doesn't make sense for us to do in-house.
And, in a way that I feel like these objects are what we're trying to transform the resin objects into on a specific level, because they're about the same cost for us to produce, but have this higher perceived value in like the current marketplace in Brooklyn. So I think it's just about we're always trying to like evolve our practice into what we can do with the limited resources, whether they be, $5 of spandex and foam, or what we can do in studio.
This is another project we've been working on that we showed last month. And it's basically just zinc that's been poured over these glass spheres in a steel mold. And so the zinc encapsulates and kind of freeform these shapes, and they're just slid over this light that's a bar. So because each panel weighs differently, you hang the light, and then you can kind of balance it like a scale. This is a project we did for the Walker. They wanted us to design an intangible object, which a lot of people were doing digital things or like performative things, and we didn't really know that's not what we do. So we kind of in Chinese culture, there's like these joss products where like they're like paper versions of luxury objects that you burn to send to your ancestors. So we just made paper versions of our products that you cut out and you burn. And instead of fake gold, this is like real gold leaf that's been applied to the posters. And then this is a project we did for Kadrat last year. This is like a line dance costume made with a lot of very heavy wool. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This is great. This was 20 years looking back and looking into the future. I'd like to invite our guests to maybe come up and have a seat. We have stools here for everybody, so not one is better than another, so you don't have to like fight over which one. But what I'd like to do is maybe between Chad and I, we can ask a couple of kind of pointed questions to get a conversation going, and then I'd love to open it up for some questions from the audience as well. And I would just maybe like to tie together a couple of themes that I observed over the past hour or so, and one of which is this idea of working in a place in which there's a great degree of urban density and there's a large variety of different kinds of people making different kinds of things, and how that can allow for weirder and more challenging things to be made in a way that can't really be made anywhere else. And so I'd like to sort of pick that up and open it up to our guests and ask the question about Ari and Elise, you had a slide that said something about from Fort Greene to Bed-Stuy to Greenpoint, and you sort of went through this sort of like somewhat elliptical little sequence. And what about this massive population out in the rest of the borough? You know, what about Brownsville? What about Bay Ridge? What about East Flatbush? And what about all those other neighborhoods? And how can we scale out this sense of inclusion and diversity in a place as massive and densely populated as where we're all working now?
There we go. I definitely don't think that we have the answer between us for how to scale to the rest of the borough, but I will say that we have tried to find the perfect kind of mix of enticing options. So we have in the space, one of the big parts that we didn't discuss is we have a restaurant in the space, and that was kind of a low-hanging fruit for us. We thought if we have food, that will be a low barrier, like people will come into the space, and then we can kind of trick them into staying for like design conversations. So we have a restaurant that's a partnership between Frederick Berzelius and Klaus Meyer of Noma and Frederick Berzelius, who brought the first Michelin star to Brooklyn. But Klaus also does a ton of work in Brownsville, for example. So what we try to do is also talk about food and design as a way to get kind of people who would not necessarily think that design or design space is for them. Again, with the Water Futures thing, we brought in a doctor of marine biology, and I told her about ADO, and she said, "Oh, I live in Brooklyn. I've never been there, but I guess I wouldn't because I don't work in design." And I was like, "No," it was like taking a bullet. I was like, "No, it's for you too." And then she came, and now we're working on something together. So I think it's through the programming and sort of spending our time really asking people and asking ourselves who should be on these panels, who should be moderating, who should be in the audience, because that's how we get people to believe that design is for everyone and these spaces are for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'll add is that it's, to me, a question of infrastructure a lot as well. I think that we've done a pretty good job of building out the northern Brooklyn infrastructure, and I think that I live in South Brooklyn, so actually it feels very much like I'm like trudging back to the suburbs at the end of the workday, which is kind of funny, but it just doesn't have, even though you have like large Victorian homes in Dimas Park where I live, and there's certainly a lot of nice design being consumed, it doesn't seem like a lot of it's actually happening in that neighborhood. And that's not even the most extreme example within the borough. So I think really, working with certainly local schools in a lot of these neighborhoods and kind of expanding the base of potential designers up and coming, educating the public on what kinds of opportunities. Dan and I were talking about that like before the session tonight. I think really just building out that infrastructure in a wider capacity will go a long way.
Yeah, I mean, we were in Greenpoint like 3 years ago, and we moved. A lot of people have been moving to South Brooklyn, to Sunset Park. North Brooklyn. As much as is still going on there, a lot of people have. It's a lot of people have been priced out of, manufacturing in North Brooklyn.
Yeah, we also have to admit that Greenpoint is a little bit of a challenge because we did a few things out there with the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce and this really great PR company called Novita that for the Brooklyn Designs trade show that's there at the conference center. So we designed a few spaces over the years and had from our slide, the Design Against Hate conference. The event that we had was also out there in Greenpoint. But even though Greenpoint can sometimes is part of the challenge, it's not necessarily the whole thing. I think we've moved to New York, I'd say about going on 4 years ago. And in that time, we've definitely been overwhelmed by the strength and the depth of the creative community here. It's one of the things we love most about living in Brooklyn, and especially the creative community of color. But there is always the issue of representation, and there is always the issue of visibility. And it's one of the reasons we started Afro Chic originally in its blog format was to address that idea, because we didn't think that there were enough people of color in design and wanted to do something to call out those people who were there. And what we started to find over the years was that there are actually a significant number of people of color involved in all facets of design, and that the issue was less presence and more about visibility and representation. And so that's part of what we've tried to do. And as I've said, in terms of creating platforms and giving people who have something to say an opportunity to say it, is to try and drive that up so that when you have great work being done, like it sounds like ADO is doing, that it's a little easier to spot who the people are out there that you want to connect with.
Yeah, that was good. No, we get more questions in that chat. Did you have any thoughts? Yeah.
So I do want to say something that I think it's great. I love what ADO brought and what all of you guys brought to this. And one of the ideas, as Dan and I were talking about this, is just how can we really increase more voices in the community? And for what I do, for looking for product for the Brooklyn Museum, I'm trying to represent all of Brooklyn in some ways. And a lot of this, I think, stemmed from my kind of, not frustration, but just like searching, that there's a lot of what we consider Brooklyn, it's still a very finite amount. And like this world stage, as I mentioned earlier, and like the capital D design world is still a very small amount of Brooklyn. And how, like, is it necessary to increase that, or does it not necessarily necessary to increase that? But like, where does that line live? And if we do want to do that, if we do want to expose different neighborhoods and different people and different voices to the world we live in, which may or may not be correct, but how do we kind of look at that, and how do we do that, and what does that mean?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I don't feel it's as much a frustration as I think there's a lot out there. I think Brooklyn's like any other place. Like, we're originally Bry's from Philadelphia, and so it's a city based upon neighborhoods, and Brooklyn is also a city based upon neighborhoods. We came into New York 4 years ago, so we always kid that we live in Brooklyn, but we're the friends who actually visit someone in the Bronx, where most people aren't going to do that, or go into Manhattan a lot. But even crossing to another neighborhood for people feels uncomfortable. It's like, well, I live in Bed-Stuy. I'm not going to go over to Greenpoint. Like, why would I go over to Greenpoint? Everything that is around me is in Bed-Stuy. And I think we live in Crown Heights, and it's kind of the same, where it's like, that's where my community is. I think that what is intrinsic and important for designers to do and always be thinking about is getting out of our bubbles. And I don't like to talk about bubbles that much, because I think New York is an amazing bubble and I love it. But I think designers can actually get into these bubbles where you start to go into rooms and everyone looks the same and everyone is the same people coming at all the parties, and you're kind of like, I just stopped going. We just stopped going to those types of events where it felt like it was stale, and we needed to find something new. And I think it's the same with neighborhoods and communities and the museums and these organizations, is to get out and find where are people creating something new? Where are people on the corner who are just, playing something new? What's happening on the subway where someone is, doing we just saw a guy as we were coming here who was getting videotaped where he was he's a subway dancer. answer, So it's like, that's what I'm always looking for, and that's what keeps me inspired. A lot of our friends aren't designers, love artists, fashion designers, people who work in film, people who work in music, and to try to just kind of pop that bubble that we're in as designers, because we can always kind of be in our heads, but look outside of ourselves and even look outside of the places where we're working and kind of walk around a little more. And I think once you start to do that, you do find people, and they might not call themselves the capital D designer. I can think of somebody in Brownsville right now who's an amazing artist, but may not be known to a lot of people because it's just what he does in his backyard. So, I think that's important too. And I think, also when you think about what we love about Brooklyn, it's authenticity. And I think people expect that authenticity back. So if it feels like oh, they're just trying to grab me and bring me into this space and it doesn't feel authentic, they're going to see that. They're going to see through that BS right away. They're just going to be like, well, no, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to go in there. I don't feel a connection to that. And it's intrinsic upon us as designers to create that visceral connection for people, where they just want to come in, they want to hold on, they want to eat, they want to drink the coffee, they want to come into the museum and just sit. They might just want to sit in the beginning hallway of the museum and not even go upstairs. And those are the kinds of things that we have to, I think, intrinsic upon us to create.
I think there's an interesting moment in design that I think a lot of people will relate to now, which is, and I'm going to use one totally overused buzzword, which is kind of lack of engagement. So I think with social media, it's like, really easy to go on Instagram and just kind of thumb through your feed and like think that you're kind of intaking all of the world's design vocabulary out there. And I think an interesting trend right now is especially like vernacular design. So like seeing, because I'm a graphic designer, I see especially like, I think half of the graphic designers I follow on Instagram love to post like awnings of Chinatown, because like all of the like weird squish type and the like, the things that are like so organic that like nobody at RISD would have taught you how to do that. So like you have to kind of like, go through and then like take a scan of like, an image that you see in Chinatown and then kind of be like, oh, I'm going to squish my type so it looks like a dry cleaner, on like Grand Street or something. That's happening a lot and you see it everywhere, but there's no engagement there with the origin of that idea, right?
Or the thing itself.
Exactly. So you're just kind of ending up in the situation where it's like, I mean, I guess you could call it like a form of cultural appropriation in the sense that like it's somebody kind of, taking this thing and sort of like reinterpreting it for their own purposes without there ever being like a literal connection between the two communities. And I think that's something that we have to work to overcome. So like actually stopping and maybe having a conversation. I think Chen's Instagram feed is always a good source of that. Really like crossing over to seeing like not just the vernacular for like an exotic thing, but actually something that you should engage with and talk to.
Well, it ties in a little bit to something that Kyle mentioned in the very beginning, which was that when the American Design Club started putting on all of these kind of make-do DIY kinds of shows, you had to go out and see the thing and see the show and go to the party and be there amongst all the people. And I remember the thrill of those days because it felt like I was somebody who had a little tiny rented bench space and I might be able to make 15 of something in an afternoon. And now all of a sudden there was a place to support that. And that I think is maybe the core of the opportunity that we have and we need to grasp for the future, is that Brooklyn is full of people who are making do, who bring understanding of material and understanding of how to make things and how to create function from somewhere else or from their family or from their heritage. And we could do a better job perhaps of allowing those people who make do and can actually make things and make things themselves be better supported, because we can then actually create an identity for what it means to be an American designer in a much the same way that you guys did with the American Design Club, right? Like it could be about representing all of these people across this huge borough who are managing to create something meaningful for them and for their family or whoever else, right?
Right. And it sounds like this is again where you come into like this idea of authenticity, and which is important, and it's something to come across because things have changed and they have shifted from the time where you had to be sort of in the clique of design to know about the event that was going on and go out to it, to now what you have with social media and everything that entails, right? And the interesting thing is, I mean, especially speaking specifically about Brooklyn, is you realize, Brooklyn became a brand because it was already a culture. And that was what drew the attention to it. But in a lot of ways, it gets kind of tricky because it's sort of like, like quantum physics, just the act of observing changes the thing. Yeah, exactly. So now that there's so much attention on it, how do you maintain that concept of authenticity? How do you expand it to include everything that Brooklyn is? And at the same time, as Janine was saying, create that sort of visceral feel because, a lot of the communities we're talking about are very used to being pandered to. They're very used to being marketed to. They're very used to people who are trying to take what is special and unique about them and give very little or nothing in return through whatever gimmick or slogan or whatever that they're using at the time. So being able to sort of cross that, and again, it's like you were saying with the awnings in Chinatown, it's being able to say, not just look at that and go, okay, well, the way that the letter is, the way that this is crushed or whatever is very cool, but then also understand, take the time for that engagement to go, this is where that comes from, and this is what it means, and this is what its significance is, which one of the things that we always try to impress with all the designs that we do is understanding that sort of that deeper engagement with culture that gives soul and depth and meaning to whether it's an event or a space or even an individual piece.
I wanted to kind of talk about the bubbles that you were mentioning earlier, about like how designers can be in their bubbles, and I think we need more things like an ADO or more things that are going to be a megaphone for designers, because it's always been my philosophy that that designers need to stay creative, and they have to be able to do everything, but it's very difficult to like stay creative, be creative, and then promote yourself and then get your word out there. Where I think that like a lot of the reason that I kept going with the American Design Club is because I just felt like if I abandon it, I'll abandon that speaker that we have that we can bring people out. And I want designers to not have to worry so much about not being able to promote themselves, because there are things that they can rely on and attach themselves to, like the American Design Club, which has we have a retail thing in down on Canal Street, which is kind of funny you're talking about Canal Street, but we've always been nomadic. Like we've always made a point to show with several different venues so that we can kind of touch across all different categories. But then when ADO landed, it was like, whoa, what is this like thing that exists?
Spaceship.
Yeah. And which is great, but I think we need more of those types of people and things that want to write about design or want to feature design or want to create a venue for design, so that and I think that they should happen all over, but kind of maybe what you were saying, Chad, it's like you got to go where the masses are, though. Like if you want to maximize the attention on your space and do it again next time, you kind of have to go where the crowds are. So, but I do think that the people who are down Brownsville, I'm on the steering committee for NYC by Design, and we talk about how to activate all the boroughs. So we're talking, well, how the hell do we activate Staten Island? It's like, well, you got to go there and find out what someone's doing and then tell them that we want to support you. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's not a lot of, entities like that exist that help, promote designers, unapologetically almost. Yeah. So.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions?
Yeah. One of the things I think it came up. Hold on one second. Then. Or go ahead.
Okay.
It's a question for Elise. Earlier, you mentioned the challenge of scalability in terms of sharing or interpreting Brooklyn design. For your example was Madrid. And I was just wondering, when you say Brooklyn design, what comes to mind?
So I think that what I'm talking about specifically is what we're doing in the company, which is to try and ADO has been such a success for us in a lot of ways, trying to figure out whether it would work in other markets. And ADO started off being so Brooklyn-centric. That was our story. And if you read the early press, it is really about Greenpoint, why we chose Greenpoint. We're in an IBZ, which is sort of like an area for makers, lots of tools and specialists in the area. And so as we pivot from that into something more global, we can't really use that same narrative, especially if we're talking about Madrid or Berlin or all these other areas. I used to live in Berlin, and I know that a lot of the things that people will pay for here, community space, a private club like a Soho House or a Neue House or this kind of thing doesn't work in Berlin in the way it works here. And I think acknowledging that the things that we consider to be like intrinsically Brooklyn, the style, the way that people come together, the differences by neighborhood, when we're talking about cultural and racial differences, ethnic differences. In Berlin, for example, there are lots of different groups of people, but there are not, I mean, I was there were not a lot of Black women, Black American women especially there. And when we're talking about design, I worked for a German company doing sort of online design as a platform. We had a very hard time finding designers of color in Germany. And so I think when you're talking about the similarities to Brooklyn are this kind of same challenge of making sure that you're telling lots of different stories. The differences are that like Brooklyn is Brooklyn. And like you cannot pick it up and just drop it in Madrid or drop it in Berlin. You have to figure out what is the essence of what we're trying to say about Brooklyn, or like what Brooklyn represents to New York and what New York represents to the world, and then take that little seed and plant it and like pray for it and that it actually works, and then allow that city that you put it in to sort of embed itself onto it. I mean, even the space, we built the space, we had an idea of how people would use it. We were like, this is the public space, this is where people will have coffee and buy food all day long, they will just eat and the restaurant will thrive. And guess what? Like, that's not how it works at all. And so we learned early on that like whatever we think it's going to be, it will actually be what people use it for. And we have to be able to be flexible instead of going into these cities and into these places and saying, this is what it is. We say, this is what we think it is and how we think you'll like it. Now, show us how you like it. And so that's, I think, what I was getting at.
So I want to say something what you just said, because I think it's really interesting, and something you guys had in your slides, which I also found really interesting, is breaking up the two ideas. So Brooklyn is Brooklyn and design is design. And I know a handful of us up here think of design in a different way than the other handful of us up here. Like, I think in that sense, like how, you know, in that same idea, like you can't take, like you could take design from New York and maybe drop it in Milan or drop it in Tokyo or drop it in Madrid, but you can't take Brooklyn. So in what sense, what are those ideas that we can distill out there? And like, how can we, I mean, I keep thinking about this thing, and what I was going to say before, is I think somewhere along the line we started talking about, and maybe Ari said this, about schools and teaching and kind of teaching design. And I know a lot of other communities, you know, teach art to kids and they teach, you know, fashion to kids, but no one's really teaching like design to kids per se. I mean, I know there are some programs, but I don't think any of us have ever really been involved in it. Not that we're the people who necessarily need to be involved, but it's not a widespread thing. And maybe that's like a growth thing. And just thinking of how you guys would distill out what you're doing, maybe that's a way to kind of think out that you're taking out the bits of the programs that are expandable, which is probably what you're thinking, and putting that in versus the Brooklyn side of it. So
I'm going to let Ari take this because he has a child and he'll know.
I mean, she's 1, so she's not in school yet. But
but I'm just thinking, like, you know, I've never built like as a child or like growing up building a chair or a light or understanding those things. And these are things that surround us all day long, or how to put a room together, how to paint a wall. Like, I mean, I grew up on a farm, so I knew how to paint a fence. But like, you know, I never knew how to build a chair.
I think something that's interesting on that front is we hosted a hackathon back in February that Kai helped out with, and somebody here in the room I see was also part of the hackathon. And what was interesting about it was the idea, as we conceived it, was really to come up with like product level solutions to urban problems. And the idea was like, rather than, you know, redesigning the subway from scratch, like instead thinking about like, what is a product that you can create that will make the subway experience more manageable. The problem is we didn't really say that. So we just kind of assumed that like it would be understood that if we said, you know, we're here to like redesign the subway experience, people took it very literally and were like, we're going to redesign the subway station. We're going to redesign how we, you know, shovel snow, or like how we kind of, and it was interesting to me because I think it speaks to the gap between what you learn in design school versus what you learn what you think design is outside of a design school. So outside of design school, a lot of people's experience with design is like a charrette or something. So you go and, you talk about like, oh, the subway's smelly and it's hot and it's like whatever. And then the solution is like, okay, make the subway less smelly, make it less hot. And like, that's not a product level solution, which is kind of interesting. So it's like, how do you, whatever, like the Smellomatic 3000, that's like a thing that makes the subway smell less. Like that wasn't the kind of thing that was like necessarily proposed as part of this hackathon. So it made me think a lot about what we do next time to make it clearer that like what we're thinking of is like something really specific for two reasons. One, because I think it's a lot more manageable to actually produce. It's really hard to redesign a subway station. It's not impossible. You're probably part of a team of like hundreds of people that works at some huge architecture firm that only does subway stations. And that's not the easiest gig to get right away, whereas it's a lot easier to just be like, hey, I'm going to Kickstarter this thing and it's going to make my subway riding experience a lot easier. I think that's something that I want to see more of. And that's something that speaks to the education question of being like, how do we bring that to more schools around the city and more schools around Brooklyn? That concept instead of like this kind of huge, like grandiose idea of like what design can be.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. And please stick around. We do have some food and some wine, so you're welcome to stick around. I would also like to extend a thanks to our staff who have helped coordinate this event, Darren and Hien. Really, really helpful getting everybody together and being able to manage all this. So thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of our guests, Kyle, Kai, Chen, Ari, Elise, Janine, Brian, and Mark. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for coming.